In typical ReZero fashion, we got more questions than we did answers this week. If it wasn't to the whole Elsa name-dropping this mysterious person called Amelia, to whoever is backing Elsa and being her client, to the mysterious conversation between Rosewall and Subaru, and even the whole mysterious nature of Garfield's change in personality throughout this episode, there is a lot to tackle and a lot to really just think about when it comes to this week's episode of ReZero. Now, obviously, one of the main things I do want to get into first, before anything else, is the Amelia stuff, because I think it's incredibly important, and it definitely shows a major shift, or a contrast, in comparison to the previous episodes of ReZero Season 2. So let's get it on out there. So if you remember what I talked about in my last week's episode review of ReZero, I talked about trust, lies, secrecy. That was the main topic of discussion throughout my last week's video. And I talked about how, you know, with the whole conversation with Rosewall, how there was lies, how there was trust issues, how there was secrecy, and Amelia was being left out. She was not being told anything. She was being sheltered, basically. But if there was one scene that really mattered most throughout last week's episode, it was definitely the scene when Subaru confronted Amelia, and he's like, I believe in you, I know you can do this, and it was a very heart-to-heart and emotional scene, and obviously, thanks to Subaru resetting, that scene never happened. And the thing is that that moment meant a lot. It was basically Subaru saying, don't give up, I know you can do this, I believe in you, I trust in you completely. And that was a major moment for Subaru, basically giving Amelia the confidence that she needs. You gotta remember, Amelia doesn't have anyone to help her. She's by herself. The only one that she can actually turn to right now is Subaru, because Puck is not answering, he's not popping up. Rosewall is someone that has lies, trust issues, and secrecy. Ram is someone that's on a similar boat with Rosewall, and then you have the whole situation with the others throughout Sanctuary that's given lies and secrecy. Amelia's kind of by herself, and the only one that she can really count on is Subaru. So the reason why last week's conversation between her and Subaru was so important was because Subaru was being that helping hand for her, being that role of Puck, but at the same time, he was believing in Amelia and what she's capable of. Instead of holding her hand throughout the entirety of it and doing it for her, she was able to stand on her own 2 feet and try to take on the trials. So when you look at the change of this episode, Subaru really didn't show much care at all. He didn't show much care to Amelia's situation. He did say that he was worried about Amelia, and that's why he wanted to do the test for her, but once again, this goes back into the trust issues that Garfield kind of implanted into his head at the end of last week's episode. Remember what I said, is when Garfield started to talk to Subaru, he's like, does Amelia even want to do these trials? Does she actually want to see what she's seeing? It seems like she's suffering, she doesn't want to do it. Is that really how she feels? And then Subaru thought about it, and it's like, was she lying to me? Did she truly not want to actually do these trials and she was just putting on a brave face? Or was that really how she was? Was she really, you know, actually wanting to do it? And it made him very conflicted. And you can see that the actual, you know, trust issues was implanted into Subaru's mind, where he was like, maybe you don't really want to do this, Amelia. I'll do it for you don't have to suffer. I will protect you from everything that is coming your way, which technically Subaru kind of has so far throughout the majority of Season 1. So when you look at it, it makes sense why he came to that conclusion. He wasn't trying to be brutal, he wasn't trying to be mean, but you got to think about the situation, is that he doesn't have full trust in Amelia. The way he, you know, stated that, it was basically saying that he didn't believe in Amelia being able to overcome her past, being able to overcome whatever is going on within her trial, and that really hurt Amelia. That's why she's like, do you really not trust in me? Do you not believe in me? And so you can see the 180 shift compared to last week's episode of Amelia's confidence, how she had confidence in herself after what Subaru said, and in this week's episode, she's kind of was torn down and literally left to the side, like getting kicked, like a horse being kicked on the ground. That's literally what happened to her, and Subaru didn't try to do that, but that's basically what he did. And to make matters worse, when he just straight up decided to leave Sanctuary and leave Amelia just with a letter, and not even actually come face to face and talk with her about anything, it made the situation a hell of a lot worse. Obviously, Subaru's gonna get to reset, and everything that happened within this episode technically is null and void, but that is still a major point, is that the way Subaru handled the whole Amelia segment was definitely not the way to go about it. He was not factoring in Amelia's feelings, how she needs to overcome this trial, and if Subaru does it for her, it kind of undermines everything, and that she's basically like, oh, I'm just a sheltered little, you know, princess, you know, I can't do anything by myself. So it's a big part, and I think many are not really going to notice that when it comes to this episode of how Subaru reacted to Amelia, because it's like he didn't really care about how she was going through all that emotional turmoil. He did, but really didn't. He didn't do it in the right way, which now let's get into the reason why he did it. So if we look at Subaru's perspective, I think many of us will understand why he did it. The reason why is because he's on a timer. He doesn't know how much time he has to get over to the mansion and save Rem, save Frederica, save Petra. He doesn't know how long he has until Elsa's attack on the mansion begins. So obviously, he's pressed for time. He has to be moving. He has to go. And he knows now that return by death doesn't necessarily help him. Return by death is only used to save his life and bring him back, but it is not used to save others' lives. For instance, return by death does not care about anyone else. That, for instance, look what happened to Rem. Rem is now technically permanently gone for the time being, and she can't, from what we know, come back for now. So because of that, return by death is always something that could potentially get a checkpoint past a person's death, and Subaru will be permanently locked with someone permanently being gone. So that is why he was in such a rush to get over there, because more time that ticks down, the more that a potential checkpoint can pop up, the more it can be worse for him. For instance, what if he got a checkpoint after Rem dies, Frederica dies, and Petra dies after Elsa goes to the mansion? It makes a lot of sense that, you know, he wants to get over there as quickly as possible, because if they die and he's unaware of it and he gets a checkpoint, we know what happens. So yeah, it makes sense why he was so much in a rush this week. But once again, he did not factor in Amelia's situation, which is something he definitely needs to think about while trying to tackle this mansion ordeal. So let's go a little bit further into it. Now, we got to look at Garfield as well. Garfield was definitely a key character in the early half of this episode. He was a big deal in terms of, like, how he reacted to Subaru talking about the trials, talking about how he did to Amelia. Basically, he's like, you know, I'll do it for you. The way he reacted, it seemed like he was a little bit shocked and hurt. It seemed like he took it a little bit personal with how Subaru reacted to the whole trial situation. When Subaru's like, oh, I was able to overcome the first trial, and I was able to, you know, overcome my past and all that. Amelia, that's what you have to overcome, and Amelia, you have 2 more awful, gruesome trials ahead of you that you have to actually handle. And the way Subaru kind of handled this, it was very, I guess, not right. He kind of just threw it at Amelia's like, hey, here you go. You know, you got to deal with all this awful crap by yourself and all that. You're going to have to overcome it, but I can do it for you. And it's kind of like, you know, Garfield took that in a wrong way. You could just see by his whole reaction to Subaru saying this that he did not like it. And this kind of goes back to the previous episode, actually, when Garfield confronted Subaru about him taking a trial. At the end of last week's episode, not this week, but last week, Garfield confronts Subaru on the carriage and is like, you took the trial, didn't you? And then Subaru's like, yeah. And the way Subaru went about it, it was like he wasn't trying to, you know, say, oh, it was easy. He wasn't acting like it was easy. He was acting like it was kind of rough. He was still emotionally attached to that entire moment. And the way you see how he reacts to that, Garfield kind of reacted to it as well. And then he starts talking about Amelia's like, hey, you know, maybe Amelia doesn't want to overcome this trial and all that. And when you see that, there was like a bond that was obviously forming between Garfield and Subaru and even Amelia, and it's kind of like they came to an understanding. But then, in this episode, Subaru does the opposite. He tries to act like, oh, the trial's nothing, it's okay, I can do it for you. And, you know, that kind of comes around kind of wrongly to some people. And you can kind of see that because of how Subaru reacted, Garfield got a little bit upset about that. Now, another thing too is the necklace that Garfield gave Subaru, which is another indication of just how much of a change Garfield was this time around in this loop. That he was not being friendly to Subaru whatsoever. He did not offer the necklace to Subaru, and he also did not act like a bro or trying to, you know, be nice to him. He didn't care at all. I mean, you had actually Garfield seem like he cared more about Amelia in this episode than even Subaru. I mean, you had Garfield even remind Subaru's like, hey, don't you want to see the missus before you go? And you know, Subaru's like, oh, I left a letter for her, and he just up and leaves. He's like, tell her goodbye and all that for me. Tell her, you know, in the best way you can. And Garfield's like, no, you do that yourself. Just everything about it shows that Subaru is very detached from the situation in Sanctuary at this moment, and he didn't really care too much about it. Once again, makes sense when you think about everything, but you just got to look at other people's perspectives as well. That's what makes ReZero so interesting, is because Subaru, even though he has Return by Death, there's others that obviously don't have that gift. They can't understand what's going on, and he needs to do it in a way that also makes them happy too. It's kind of like how the White Whale arc was handled, how they had to deal with that, and how Subaru had to make all parties happy to overcome that type of issue. With all that out of the way, let's talk about the Rosewall conversation, because that is a very big moment. Now, there's not a lot to gain from it. Like, it's big, it's a big deal, but there is a lot of foreshadowing and mystery throughout the conversation. One of the biggest mysteries is that the sudden change in Rosewall's demeanor throughout that entire conversation. When you look at Rosewall throughout last week's, he was very confident. He seemed like he was very aware of everything. Like, he was just always winning the conversation against Subaru. Nothing Subaru said or did could phase Rosewall. Rosewall was always in control of last week's conversation. But in this episode, Rosewall seemed very submissive. He seemed like he wasn't trying to control the conversation. It just seemed like, when he was talking to Subaru, he seemed very down and sad in some ways, or he had a glow in his eyes. Like, when he starts to talk to Subaru, and Subaru's like, this time and all that's going to be a little bit different, and you see Rosewall, key in, he's like, this time? And the way he says that just makes you wonder, what does he mean by that? Is Rosewall keying in on something that, he knows something about Subaru? Or is he just saying, like, oh, so you're saying this won't work out like what happened with the White Whale arc? There's a lot of questions, but the point is that Rosewall seemed very, like I said, submissive in comparison to last week. He let Subaru control the conversation, he let Subaru do what he wanted, and he let Subaru even take Ram to the mansion. It's like he had no resistance whatsoever, which is just a very strange turn of events in comparison to what we saw last week. It's a sudden shift in character, very similar to Garfield's character, so obviously more mysteries building up. So let's carry on to the Frederica stuff. So when Subaru finally is going to the mansion, he manages to finally sit down and have a heart-to-heart with Ram about Rim. And it's about time, honestly, because, like, it's Ram needs to know. She needs to know about her sister, the situation and all that, and it seems like Subaru finally found the time to be able to actually say what he needed to say. And so throughout the entire ride to the mansion, Subaru tells Ram everything. Obviously, we don't need to see the entire conversation because it's very obvious what Subaru is saying. He's probably saying everything that's happened throughout Season 1, saying how they were bonded, what actually happened in the world and all that, and, probably comparisons of what Ram actually thinks happened in the world to the loss of the horn, and, Rim feeling very guilty and ugly because of just her, thinking like, oh, I'm glad she lost her horn. Obviously, Ram was probably able to piece things together and now understand what was missing within her heart. She did realize that there was something missing. When Subaru's like, oh, I'll toss you as a decoy, she's like, I don't know what it is, but when you said that, it really upset me, made me feel really awful. And that's where Subaru started to tell her about Rim. It kind of shows that even though their memories have been altered and reality has been changed, that people still feel empty or something is missing in some parts of their heart or life. And that's kind of where Ram is at, because technically her entire personality, what she is, was formed thanks to Rim. But now that Rim is gone, it seems like Ram is a little bit more colder, and she's like, I don't understand certain things. Some things just don't make sense in my life. So I think it's very fascinating, honestly, to finally get that conversation. Then Subaru finally talks to her about it. It needed to happen, which leads into when Ram finally walks in and gets to finally see Rim for the first time. And Subaru leaves Rim and Ram by themselves. Now, obviously, upon first seeing this scene, I think many are going to come to the conclusion I would not leave, Ram alone with Rim, because you'd think that Ram might want to kill Rim. Now, the reason why I say this is because we don't really know how different this Ram is, because she obviously, in her mind, she's believed that she's lived her entire life as a single lone sibling. She's by herself and all that, didn't have a sibling whatsoever, and because of that, it makes you wonder, would she not want to see Rim around? She's like a burden to her existence, or is she like a flaw in her that she could have been better? There's so many questions, and I know many might be worried, but obviously those worries did not matter in the end, because you know, Ram did not do what many might have thought she would have done to Rim, and Rim was a-okay. But the point, though, of that conversation is that Ram did state that she could definitely see that Rim is her sister. She can feel the same blood flowing through her veins. She may be just a husk right now, basically empty shell, but she could definitely tell that this was definitely her sister at one point. And she does opt to actually leave her sister behind in the mansion to save Subaru and all them when Elsa decides to attack, which this is a very big part about this conversation, like this entire moment of the episode, is that Rim and Ram, we know they have that connection, their bond, and when Ram decides to leave her sister behind, it kind of shows once again that even now that she knows that her sister's there, she does not have that emotional attachment that she once had. Because if this would have been the Ram from Season 1, we know that if push came to shove, we don't really know who, you know, Ram would pick, if it would be her sister or Rosewall, because we saw her crying so deeply, so much in the middle of Season 1, so we know for a fact that Ram had so much attachment and love for her sister, and we know for a fact that this was Ram with her actual memories. She never, in her right mind, would ever have left her sister behind. So seeing her actually do that just goes to show once again that even though she knows now about her sister, that emotional attachment really is severed. It is not there whatsoever, and even though she knows, she is willing to still place others before her own sister, which is just saying a lot, honestly. And when she says the words like, if she really is my sister, then she would definitely say, sacrifice me to be able to save Rosewall. And Subaru's like, why would you say this? Like, I didn't bring you here to say this. You know that hit Subaru personally, because the words are definitely very similar to what Rim would have said. She wouldn't have said maybe Rosewall, she would have said Subaru, because we know she already did this once throughout Season 1. She left Subaru behind to be able to go to the mansion and try to stop whatever's happening with the witch's cult. So Rim has a track record of sacrificing herself for the one she cares about and loves. Subaru is a good example. So because of that, we know for a fact those words definitely stung, because Rim and Ram definitely are on the same thought patterns on who they care about, and they're willing to sacrifice whoever, or sacrifice themselves for the ones they love, and that just is really meaningful, and you could just see that Subaru's just really hurt by it. He's like, wow, like, really, in the end, you know, what you said is exactly what Rim would actually probably say. She would sacrifice herself to save me, and he doesn't want to see that whatsoever, ever again, after what happened with, you know, Beetlejuice in Season 1. So, okay, with all that, let's actually get into Frederica. So, Frederica gets a lot of character development and characterization actually throughout this episode. Number one, we find out that she is definitely the older sister to Garfield, which I think has been very obvious. I mean, when you look at the character expressions, their appearance and everything, they're definitely family in some way or another, and so this episode officially is like, yes, they are brother and sister and all that, and they are related, and, you know, the necklaces that they wear obviously have some form of connection, because we know that Frederica gave one over to Subaru at the beginning, and now Garfield was wearing a necklace that was very similar, and he gave it over to, you know, Ram. Then we saw Frederica see it, and she's like, oh, that's Garfield's. So when you just see that entire moment, it shows that those necklaces between the two are definitely of some form of bond. We don't know what it actually represents completely, but we know it is definitely extremely important for whatever it may be. But anyways, besides just that, Frederica also talks about how she has like an oath. She's not really able to say certain things, which is something that is very similar to what has happened with Ekidana in the previous episode of how she didn't trust Subaru, but also when it came to the situation with, let's say, Puck and, you know, Amelia, how they have like a contract, or you have the situation with Subaru and, you know, the Witch of Envy, Satala, and how he's not able to talk about return by death. Oaths are definitely something that's been existing throughout this series for a long time now. It's like you get this, like, contract, this oath, and you can't talk about it. You can't talk about certain things. And in this case, you have Frederica that's under an oath. She's under some form of contract where she cannot say certain things, and the only way that she can actually do certain things like that or say certain things is if she is forced against her will. Like if there's some form of an aggressive person coming at her is like, I'll take you against your will on all that to the sanctuary. And when she finally started to say, I'll do so and all that, she kind of finally started to talk. And Ram explained that because of her oath, she can do that. She can go around her oath if something like this happens. So it's a very big moment, honestly. It kind of reveals some restrictions, but ways to work around restrictions of certain oaths and contracts. Besides just that, we also get to see Frederica's, you know, entire demi-human form, her turning into like a beast human, which is very fascinating because you can see that she's kind of like a lioness. So when you think about it, since she's a lioness and all that, and she kind of looks like, you know, like a cat, it makes you wonder what Garfield is. Since they're technically brother and sister, Garfield most likely might be some form of lion or whatever because of just what his sister looks like. So it makes you wonder, like, if she's capable of that, obviously Garfield's capable of that because she did, like, transformation into a demi-human thanks to the crystal when she held it, and obviously Garfield most likely is very capable of this too. He's very incapable of doing this exact same thing, which would explain his absurd strength he had around episode 2 or 3 of ReZero Season 2, when he was able to kind of grab the carriage and grab, you know, Patra and kind of flip her over. This explains his absurd strength. He is definitely a demi-human, which shows that Frederica is also very similar in strength, incredibly strong, and you cannot underestimate her whatsoever. Now, speaking of underestimating her and all that, Subaru obviously was wondering if Frederica was a traitor by any means, because he doesn't know who Elsa's client is. He doesn't know who she's working for. He doesn't know who these conservative groups are that's currently in Sanctuary. He has no idea. So he automatically assumes it's most likely Frederica because you have her giving a mysterious crystal to Amelia, which somehow you have Subaru mysteriously teleport near the tomb of Ekidana, and then you have, you know, the crystal, like, seem very dangerous. Obviously, it seems like Frederica is a culprit, like she is, you know, evil, she might be bad, but then he comes to find out that Frederica really isn't that, so he's very confused. So, who is the one that is doing the mysterious traitorous things behind the scenes? Who is the one that is working with the conservative group to cause certain problems throughout Sanctuary? What is really going on here? And so that pretty much concludes the Frederica stuff. So now we move into the stuff with Elsa. So Elsa appears early, and this is something that is definitely incredibly important to key in on. Subaru thought because he arrived a couple days early and, you know, things were a-okay, that things would work out. Elsa would probably attack on the 3rd day or whatever, or maybe the next day, and he would have some time to plan and consider what to do. But it's very clear, upon arriving to the mansion, he only had maybe a few hours, and Elsa finally initiated her attack. And she basically stated throughout the episode that she had a set plan that Subaru would arrive in a few days. He was very early, he would arrive in a few days, and then she would be able to take out the 2 maids in a shut-in, which basically makes you wonder, okay, so her client knows that Subaru would definitely return to the mansion very quickly, very soon, but on top of that, knows about Beatrice and knows about the 2 maids, and it makes you wonder, how in the hell does someone know about Beatrice? Because you would assume maybe it might be Rim, but that doesn't make any sense, because Rim's existence is completely erased. So no one should really know about Rim whatsoever. So the only person that you could think of would be Beatrice. So you're just like, wait a minute, so who hired Elsa to get rid of Beatrice, get rid of the 2 maids? Makes you really wonder, like, how does someone know this information? And she also says, like, I had to initiate early because you arrived early. So no matter what Subaru does, if he decides to get there early, Elsa will initiate her attack. So she's prepared. She is ready. No matter what Subaru does, you know, when he arrives, the attack begins. So he can't get there early like he normally did with the Witch's Cult in the previous season. He now, as soon as he gets there, he's prepared for an open all-out battle against Elsa, that mob beast that popped up, and whoever this mysterious Amelia is, which that's another question, because that was not really spoken about at all. It's a character that's never been mentioned before, and it's the first time we've actually heard the name. But this mysterious Melee that Elsa talked about, we don't know if that is her client, we don't know if that is the mob beast's name, or a completely other person. But whatever it may be, Elsa did name drop someone else, so it lets us know that there is another person at play, potentially at the mansion besides just her. So it's not Elsa that they just have to worry about, it's the Maw Beast, and if it really is as bad as we think it is, then there might be a third person that is there, or a third entity that could also cause a lot of problems. So yeah, things are getting really, really bad. That's not including the stuff at Sanctuary. When you look at Sanctuary, it seems very, safe and okay, but obviously there's another timer. Because of Amelia and all of them being stuck within Sanctuary, Subaru can't really get much support. He can't get Amelia's support, he can't get Puck's support, Reinhardt isn't around, Rosewall is injured, there's really nothing he can do. The only people that he really has on his side at this moment is Frederica and Ram that can really do anything whatsoever, which is very scary, because even though Frederica is obviously incredibly powerful, it's obviously not enough, because she got defeated by Elsa, and then whoever, this mysterious Melee is. And then Ram couldn't do anything either, and we know Subaru can't really fight Elsa of all people. So yeah, things have just gotten from bad to even worse because of everything. So yeah, it's an intense episode, which another thing I do want to mention too is all the doors once again being open. That is another key element that this episode showed again, is that most of the doors throughout the mansion were completely open, just like in the end of last week's episode. Now, another thing, too, that needs to be talked about is Beatrice's appearance at the end. And you gotta understand Subaru's anger, his frustration towards the end of the episode, because Beatrice obviously is aware of what's going on in the mansion. But she's idly sitting on by, letting these events happen, letting people die, etc. And then when Subaru's about to try to die to save Rem, the door he opens allows him to see Beatrice. And it comes to the conclusion, am I lucky? Am I unlucky? Did Beatrice save me? What exactly happened here? Because you remember, Subaru has an odd ability to where he's able to find Beatrice. He's able to walk through a door and find her, even if Beatrice sometimes doesn't want to be found. But in this case, it makes you wonder, did Beatrice purposely allow that door to connect to her? Or did Subaru just get so unlucky when he walked through that door, he walked to Beatrice, which resulted now when Elsa goes through that door, it's going to cause it to where she sees Rem, and we know what's going to happen to Rem. So yeah, just all this comes together, and you're just like, oh crap, this isn't good whatsoever. And it makes you wonder, like, Beatrice, why of all times would you step in after everything that's already happened, everything is said and done? So, big deal right there. And also, speaking of which, there is a lot of dark content towards the end with the whole, Petra stuff. When you see the hand and all that, that is whoa. So, to kind of break that scene down as well, you have where Subaru, he's in the room with Petra and all that little moment, and the building collapses in, and you see Ram pop up with, Petra trying to, carry him out on the ground dragon. And when you see this, you can see that it's just glimpses. It's very dark in glimpses. You hear brief voices and all that. But it's very clear that Ram most likely disconnected Petra's arm from Subaru just to be able to carry Subaru out. Because you can see Subaru constantly holding the arm of Petra the entire time until he realizes what he's holding on to is just a hand. And so it's kind of like, that means that she died when the building collapsed. And Subaru's just holding so tightly on that Ram literally is like chop, and carried Subaru out. And upon fighting and carrying him out on the ground dragon, Petra, the ground dragon, kind of tossed Subaru through the window to get him away. She perished as well with Ram, and then we know what happened after that. So that's kind of the way to break down the events. But yeah, that's pretty much about it, though. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, how you felt about this week's episode of ReZero. Did you enjoy it? Did you hate it? Tell me your honest thoughts in the comments below. But with that, I love you guys. Be safe, stay healthy. Chibi out.